Hello, this is Miguel Gutierrez speaking for the research done by me and Christian Gutierrez about how Emmett Till and his family sparked the civil rights movement with the death and murder of Emmett Till. Throughout history, many things happened during the time of civil rights movement. A question people might ask is what might have started the civil rights movement? Well, to what knowledge we have researched, we might have found what caused this movement to spur, and it all started with an African boy named Emmett Till. Now, you might be wondering, how could a single boy cause the movement? As crazy as that sounds, it's true. This boy from Chicago was the fire that sparked the civil rights movement. The event that happened to this young man was something totally uncalled for, but the result was that Emmett Till was murdered. After Emmett was killed, it caused a rather big tension between the whites and blacks in Mississippi. But back then, things were segregated and racism was worse than it is today. The activists found ways to help the cause of the civil rights movement and show people around the nation that Emmett's death was evidence to how blacks were being treated. So let's dive into how Emmett was killed and started the civil rights movement. Let's start with Emmett Till. Born in Chicago, his mother Mammy Till said he was always the type of person to not get into much trouble. Emmett Till was going to visit his cousins in Mississippi over the summer. There was a big difference when it came to segregation of Chicago and Mississippi. While of course Chicago was very segregated, Mississippi on the other hand was 10 times as worse. For an example, Mississippi was so segregated that they buried their dead in cemeteries in a segregated manner and did not allow blacks to be buried with whites. That today seems really unnecessary and dumb, but back when that was a normal thing, which is crazy to even think about. Even when Emmett was about to leave to Mississippi, his mom told him to be respectful and speak only when spoken to, and to refer to men and women as sir or ma'am. When he finally got there, he was staying at his cousin's house, Simeon. Simeon and Emmett would go around Mississippi, minding their own business, when they finally came up to a store named Bryant's Grocery Store to buy a pop or candy. Emmett's cousins didn't want to leave Emmett alone in the store because of his unknown knowledge of life in Mississippi. But as they were leaving the store, Mrs. Bryant was leaving behind them to go to her car, and Emmett jokingly let out a loud big whistle. Simeon and Emmett's other cousin, Maurice, looked at each other and quickly ran to the car, while Emmett slowly came to it. Simeon and Maurice told Emmett that he had violated an unwritten law that was in Mississippi, that blacks cannot conduct with whites. Emmett told them to keep this event a secret with his uncle, or he might go back to Chicago early. Little did he know he wouldn't be going to Chicago at all. A few weeks later after that incident, Emmett was staying at Simeon's house to sleep, but then Simeon's dad heard a knock on the door, and 3 men were standing there. 2 were white, one of the white men holding a shotgun, and the other a flashlight. The third one was a black man who knew about Simeon's family. The man holding the shotgun was J.W. Millam. The other white man was Roy Bryant. Roy Bryant asked Simeon's father for Emmett, and Millam searched inside the house. Simeon's father didn't do anything rash and let the search continue. They found Emmett, woke him up, and told him to go outside. Emmett met with the woman that he whistled at, Mr. Bryant's wife, and she said that Emmett was the one that whistled at her. They put Emmett on the truck and took him away. Simeon was worried what they might have done to Emmett, but he soon figured out after a few days after the abduction. A sheriff told Simeon's father that they found Emmett's body badly beaten in the Tallahatchie River. Mammy Till had opened a casket funeral for Emmett, and the blacks of the city were furious about the death of Emmett. The men who abducted Emmett went to jail, but the blacks were at a disadvantage because it was an all-white court, and J.W. Millam and Roy Bryant testified and pronounced not guilty for Emmett's murder. This angered activists and blacks who lived in Mississippi on a grand scale. Many people were surprised of the murder case of Emmett Till and how the murderers were let off easy with a slap on the hand. but at the same time, it gave strength for activists to come up and stand up for themselves. Not only did the activists stand up, but even Emmett's uncle stood up and did something unheard of in Mississippi and testified against a white man. And not only that, he lived too. After the case, whites finally saw that blacks were being treated very unfairly and started supporting the black activists and their cause. This meant a lot because maybe if whites joined the cause, more people might join. But after Emmett's death, his uncle went to go speak at schools and spoke to children about the case and what had happened. This was a good thing because then the community would better know it and the case would cause more activists to come up. Most of Emmett's family tried to spread his case of murder. His mother would have speeches around different areas, and Mammy Till also said something quite interesting to reporters, that Emmett's father was killed in World War II in somewhat the same way Emmett was killed. His father was accused of raping a girl in France and was also killed by hanged. But other than that, Mammy would have speeches and speak at schools about segregation and how people have rights no matter what color or ethnicity they are. His death inspired many people. This inspiration is what helped cause the civil rights movement. Emmett Till's death was so influential that it spread like a wildfire. It even caused Rosa Parks not to give up her seat, even though she knew the consequences she would be in. After that, blacks boycotted to not ride the bus. She wasn't the only one that was inspired. John F. Kennedy also wanted to make a stand for the lives of African Americans. He spoke a speech and said, "It ought to be possible, therefore, for American students of any color to attend any public institution they select without having to be backed up by troops. And it ought to be possible, in short, for every American to enjoy the privileges of being American without regard to his race or his color." JFK says that race has no place in American life or law, so he promised to pass a civil rights bill allowing blacks to finally be equal and segregation to be a thing of the past. It seemed the news also angered whites, because hours after the speech John F. Kennedy made, Medgar Evers, leader of the National Association for Advancement of Colored People, was shot to death 1 week later. JFK sent the civil rights bill he promised to Congress. So many people thought all this was caused by the death of Emmett Till, and it was a big push towards the civil rights movement. The civil rights bill to be passed and many activists coming to make a change. A reporter asked many residents who lived in Mississippi about the death of Emmett Till. They found a woman who lived in Cleveland, Mississippi, and she said that the case had awoken a sleeping giant. She also said, "We knew we had to get up and do something. The Emmett Till case was a catalyst that started the movement." People weren't the only ones who thought Emmett was a huge influence and might have started the civil rights movement, but even historians also agreed and believed that Emmett's death sparked the movement. They say because of all the aftermath it created, with riots, speeches, and African Americans finally fighting for their rights after so much suppression. There's even an Emmett Till Justice campaign, and it established a department to investigate unsolved civil rights deaths before 1970. In conclusion, when Emmett Till was murdered by J.W. Milliam and Roy Bryant, it sparked the civil rights movement by creating tension, inspiring others, and in the end created change that would affect the nation. So finally, a happy boy born in Chicago did something that would create the cause of the civil rights movement, something that wasn't even that bad, nothing but a little joke. His death not only affected Mississippi, but other states to take a stand to fight for what was right. His death was still inspired many people today who would have thought he was part of something bigger. Therefore, he must have started the civil rights movement and make people make a change like Rosa Parks, Martin Luther King Jr., John F. Kennedy, and many more.